deal more with productivity, with money, with wealth. Um, that is my food every day. Um, okay, so what is stress? I like to go back to history when a medical doctor, a professor at the University of Montreal, Canada, Hans Sale, he wrote the first book on stress entitled The Stress of Life. It was published in 1956. But Dr. Sally, uh, that's how we pronounce it, talks about stress from physiological perspective, being a medical doctor. And here is a very interesting note that he came up with. He said, stress is unavoidable. And in fact, it would be undesirable to avoid it. I often say that stress is the spice of life. It can be the great stimulus to achievement. Nevertheless, it can cause disease, suffering, and death. And then he went on to create this theory called general adaptation syndrome, which is about how the body responds to challenges, alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. And then we have Professor Lazarus. Lazarus, that we all love so much as psychologists, I guess. So Lazarus came out with the cognitive perspective of stress, meaning to say, according to Lazarus, we all get stress depending on how we appraise stresses, and stressful environment, how we interpret something, whether it is stressful or not. And then he came up with cognitive coping. So basically, it's all about a disease of adaptation, a disease um, of how we actually interpret our life. Now, science does not just happen. Science comes because of we want to interpret our environment and our life. And if you realize, both Dr. Sally and Lazarus actually talk about stress in 1950s and 60s. That was when World War II and came around, and there was mass destruction. Because there was mass destruction, there was mass efforts to rebuild the world. And that's where, I guess, probably life becomes so challenging. And basically, stress comes in our life because life is a process. Because when it's a process, it's very dynamic. And when it's dynamic, we all grow by these changes. We keep experiencing changes, whether transition or transformation, slow or drastic, progress or regress, profits or mistakes. And when these changes hamper demand on our resources, our internal resources, be it cognitively, be it psychologically, when the demand impose too much pressures beyond our threshold to process it. Threshold means our tolerance, the tolerance of our body to take it, then stress happens. Now let's go to to a little bit more elaboration on how stress can happen. Well, according to Dr. Sally, when there are demands on our system responds in certain ways, in the way of alarm, resistance, and exhaustions. Okay. And therefore, we will experience eustress or distress. Eustress is a healthy level of stress. We call constructive stress. Healthy expectations, moderate stress that is within copable limit and serves as a pusher to our motivation. But beyond that, then we will experience distress, which is a destructive stress beyond our capacity to cope, too frequent, or when it's too long. It can come from personal conflicts, which we all experience in our growth process, such as adaptation as a child, identity crisis as a teen, pressure of being an adult in early adulthood, midlife crisis in our middle age, health challenge, and fear of death in our golden years, or economic and business challenges, such as operational challenges, profits and loss, interpersonal challenges, issues in family, society, friends, neighborhood, stress out of sickness, such as what we are all experiencing in this pandemic of COVID-19, stress because of dealings with or interaction with technologies, such as stress in our online life, stress working with technologies, and also civilizational change, such as war. Now let's take a look at what APA said about type of stress. So we are not going to talk about eustress now. I guess APA concerns more on distress. So APA categorizes it into three categories of stress. One is acute stress, which is when we experience an intense change in our life, And when that happens, our heart might race, our blood pressure might rise, our sense of emergency might trigger a migraine or even chest pain. And we also experience symptoms like irritability, anxiety, sadness, headaches, back pain, and gut problems. This may appear for a short time and subside when the stress eases. Now, what is more dangerous, according to APA, is actually what comes later, the more serious level, which they call it episodic acute stress, intense, more frequent, and it accumulates. Now, the symptoms are similar, but it occurs more often and accumulate over time, especially when we live in a stressful pattern, be it at work, be it in a family. And it will turn into unhealthy coping strategies such as binge drinking, overeating, clinging to bad relationship. And if this episodic acute stress is poorly managed, it can get worse to clinical depression. And the last one is chronic stress, which is a more severe, frequent, and prolonged. Basically, whatever stress that we're experiencing, when it's intense, when it comes frequently, and it's prolonged over a period of time, especially when you are suffering from chronic trauma. Then APA categorize it as a chronic stress. It could be a traumatic childhood or a chronic stressful life, such as acute poverty, for example. So those are basically, I'm trying to go as fast as I can. Those are basically the type of stress which I don't really like to talk about. And I believe this is actually one of the most prominent issues in the world of psychologists nowadays. It doesn't matter what field we are in. Even in the industry, we are all grappling with occupational stress quite a lot. And occupational stress does not stand on its own. It's always linked to many other issues, such as personal issues, family conflicts, and baggages, which is not resolved. I guess that's all from me. I hope that's not exceeding 3 minutes. Thank you, Fiona.